So Oscar Grant was killed on a platform by a BART police officer. I'll let people tell you more about that, but that's how it all began. A conversation happened between a community organizer and a police officer because they both wanted peace in our community because we're all part of the community. Jack Bryce and Bobby Hookman, please come up here. And then these two men started talking to each other. They'd be having this dialogue, having a conversation, tried to make it work. It didn't work. It was okay. But then they came aboard with Captain Michael, there you are, Michael Carroll, with the Allegheny County Sheriff's Office, and these three men together started the Barbershop Forum. So I'm going to give the floor to you, Jack. Jack is basically the common denominator. Jack is the guy who cares about the community and brought us all together. Jack is the kind of person who will bring you that cat that got ran over that 25 times. You leave it on your doorstep and like, y'all make it work, make it work.
There's no microphone except for Jack.
Yeah, Jack.
How's everyone doing?
Loud, Jack.
We can't hear you.
How's everyone doing? Like
All
Paul
right.
said, my name is Jack Bryson, and I got started in activism. It was 2009, December 2009. A young man named Oscar Grant, my two sons, and the other young man who was with Oscar Grant, they went to San Francisco, and you know what happened next. Oscar Grant was murdered. They were on their way to my apartment. Well, excuse me.
Let's try
Yeah, all right, thanks, Jack.
Sorry, that's people asking for a ride. That's how I got started. Oscar Grant was murdered, and I was worried about my sons. I was worried about the young men that were with Oscar Grant. So I started organizing, and as I started organizing, I was like coming into it. But then when but what I wanted to make sure is that Oscar Grant's name wasn't used, and he wasn't used for other people's agendas. And so as we started organizing, at first I liked it. I was like, yeah, this is cool, we're going against the police. But then I started seeing it wasn't about Oscar Grant, it was about other people's agendas. It was about moving nonprofits, it was about community activists using our Oscar Grant's name to become someone like Oscar Grant. And I didn't like that, and so that's when I stepped in, and then I was like taking control of it, and then it started going back and forth. So one thing I didn't like the fact that when I was marching, and people were saying F the police, or people were breaking windows. So a lot of people, when black or brown young men, mostly black young men, when they go to jail, they don't get cited out. They have to get bailed out. But a lot of the other protesters were just getting cited out. And young men, so I felt responsible for that. So I didn't like what was going on. So I thought there would have to be another way. So I'll let Bobby step in.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Bobby Hookman is the Oakland Police Department. I've been a police officer for 22 years. I'm a captain in our downtown and West Oakland area. In 2009, I was a sergeant, and part of my duties as a liaison officer was to communicate with protest organizers and help them facilitate peaceful protests in the area. And at the time, some of the protests that occurred were not peaceful. People were breaking out windows and so on and so forth. I was introduced to Jack through a mutual friend. And as you guys can imagine, Jack was not feeling law enforcement at the time because of what he's experienced with his sons. And so during the course of that year, we were able to communicate. I was able to gain Jack's trust, and Jack was able to gain my trust. And through that year, Jack had like a paradigm shift. He was going to these meetings and everybody was F the police, we don't need the police. But through the relationship with myself and his childhood friend, Captain Carroll, it was a paradigm shift. And Jack was like, look, all police aren't bad, but that's all I'm hearing at these F the police meetings. And so Jack wanted to try to change that narrative. And so through that, we tried to establish some community groups or whatever. A couple times it just didn't work out, it wasn't the fit. Jack then introduced me to Captain Mike Carroll, who had the idea of taking our conversations directly to the people that were impacted, and that so happened to be barbershops.
At the same time, I was working as a robbery investigator for the Allegheny County Sheriff's Office, and I saw a lot of people had a great disdain for law enforcement. I wanted to try to figure out how can we bridge that communication gap. And so I was sitting back thinking who would be an intricate part in conversation so that we could improve the communication between law enforcement and the community. So I spoke with Jack, said, hey, who do you think we should actually bring into the fold? And so what we decided to do is invite other people to the table. We wanted to make sure that we had a collaborative group that represented every aspect of the community. In doing so, this is how the Barbershop Forum began, and we'll talk about the and other.
So I just want to, so as we started, you heard our story, so as we started.
Louder, Jack. Everybody was loud until you got back up there again, bro.
So as we started organizing, the thing that would bother me is like, sometimes I would go to a meeting, and when we would be at these meetings, it wasn't the community that was impacted that I was seeing at these meetings. It was the community that wasn't even part of the community that was saying, get the police out of our community. We don't need a lot of the police in our community. We can do police commuting ourselves. But when you ask these folks, like one time I went in and I said I just came back from Brookfield, they were like, what's Brookfield? So how can you, if you're asking me what is Brookfield, what is Sobrani Park, what is Fillmore, what is Hunters Point, what is Sunnydale, what is the 6-5 Village, but you're saying you want the police out of our communities, but you don't even know what these communities are. So how can you say you want the police out of our communities and you don't even live in these communities? So that's where that's why I said this dialogue has to happen, because we have people who aren't impacted speaking for the impacted community. We don't have the impacted community at the table. So it's time that the impacted community and law enforcement, DA, probation, whatever, we come together and we have this dialogue and we make it happen. But we also couldn't make it happen without Darius, DC, Glenn.
I swear I'm gonna give you a script to go on this time. I always take you my part. So, law enforcement couldn't have a conversation just talking to law enforcement because you'll get answers from law enforcement. Community couldn't have a conversation with just community because it'll be just community. So that's what we already have when you have your community functions. But a very important aspect of the Barbershop Forum was bringing law enforcement, community, and then people that we are calling now, which were this
Returning residents.
returning residents. These are people who are also been called formerly incarcerated, but we're trying to change that narrative. We're trying to change that word because they are returning, and they're returning to the community and becoming returning residents. So, Garris, stand up, sir. DC, OG. Am I forgetting anyone?
Troy.
Where's Troy? We're not there yet.
Troy.
He left.
Troy's not here. So, these three gentlemen and other people part of them, stand up. Are you returning citizen? Returning resident? You've been to a lot of barbershop forums, so I'll make sure that you are brought into the family here. The stand. We call him OG, but this is Mr. Glenn Bailey. Glenn, your story. You have a long time behind bars. Talk to me about that. It's just 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 50, 52 years. How many people are younger than 52? Raise your hand. That's it. DC, put your hand down. Stop lying. But he spent your entire lifetime and then some behind bars. Your story, sir, most of it was in.
Well, when I came home from prison, and I was introduced to the barbershop dialogue, very second meeting. I went to the meeting. It was in 107th Avenue, I think, in East Oakland. Well, I knew this was a hot area, and I slowly realized that I was on this ex-convict, and everybody else was police, lieutenants, and captains, and lawyers and judges. But I was feeling the humanity. I was feeling the love in the room because I was in the room with some people that really cared about the society, about the environment. And I've been back ever since. Other than when I had a little major surgery or whatever, I couldn't come, but I will miss it. And I'm so glad to see it in Berkeley. And hopefully that we'll see it in Berkeley again real soon somewhere and more people come out.
Garris, your story, sir.
My story is that I went to prison for 17 plus years, and when I got out, I became involved in a lot of the community work. And that's how I met Jack Bryson. I was doing what's called ceasefire walks in West Oakland, and Jack was sitting on the corner, and he looked kind of distressed. It was on February, Valentine's Day of 2014, and Jack asked me, what were we doing? And I said, we were walking against gun violence. And he says, you know, he had just left a meeting at City Hall in Oakland where you had all these grieving mothers that had lost sons and daughters to gun violence, and they weren't killed by the police. And so that's how Jack and I, we got together. And from there, we started having dialogue about different things. And one of the things that he started talking to me about was having dialogue with law enforcement, which I was open to because I had been in law enforcement as a young man. And it didn't last very long, but I still knew growing up right here in the city that I knew that all cops were not bad cops. As a matter of fact, most of the police that I had encounters with in the city of Berkeley back in the 70s, just recall them fondly. They were great people that I've mentioned. One that comes to mind is, we called him JJ Gwynn, and it was other people. So I knew that there were good people and bad people in all walks of life, and I felt that we needed to have this conversation, so that's what we went.
Don't sit down. DC.
Yes, as a returning resident, actually my activism started prior to me getting released from the California Department of Corrections. I did 26 years on a life sentence, and so my journey started by helping expand the conscious awareness of the young brothers and those that was in the system, because when I started, changing my mindset, I felt a need to start changing those around me who was eventually going to return back to their communities. And then bringing that out to the street, Glenn Bailey and Jack Bryson, they both asked me would I, attend some barbershops and see what I think about it. Well, it's been a minute now, and I think it's a good concept. So, this is just my way of sitting at the table, being a stakeholder, letting our voices be heard, but also giving back to the same community at one point we helped destroy.
In DC, that's a very important part. All of them. You've got law enforcement officers working with people who were returning residents, who were in jail, who spent 52 years behind bars, that we're all working together now, putting our arms around each other because we are a family. We truly are a family. Because it's very important that we can't do this alone. I can't understand his story. I can't understand his story. I can't understand their story. But working together, that story is heard because we're working together to make sure that story is told by so many different people. Because you're hitting so many different aspects and so many different opportunities to better the community as a whole. That's important. You can't just do it by yourself. You need help. And if you can't say you need help, I personally think you have a problem. But that's me. Other law enforcement, other members of the Barbershop Forum, please stand up really quickly. We have DA's office, we have SF. Woo, Lord Jesus, help me tonight. All these people together are part of the Barbershop Forum. And before you told me that I had a friend, a family member who spent 52 years behind bars, and I told you you're crazy. If I told you I had this many law enforcement friends, because I have enough, didn't want any more, but I gladly welcome them into the family because we are a family. We get along like a family. We don't like each other like a family. But we've been doing this for 2 years, and that's very important to all of us. And we want all of you to be part of that family. We have people a part of the family who don't always agree with us. Victims. Because that story also needs to be heard. Jack, if you don't hear that, everyone's story has to be heard. Everyone's story has to be told. Everyone have a seat. Thank you very much. And without this group and without this community together, we can't move forward. Because we are what? Community. Thank you so much. You want to dance? The Barbershop Forum is just not about coming and having a conversation. We've gone to 7 or 8 different cities, 4 different counties. We've gone into 2 juvenile halls. We've done San Francisco Juvenile Hall, and we did Solano County Juvenile Hall. We went to San Quentin this past Friday and did a Barbershop Forum inside there because it's so important to have that conversation. We also went to Santa Rita Jail. It's so important. You guys really don't understand how important it is because going inside there, people are going to be nervous at first. But when you have that conversation and dialogue, you realize that everyone's a person. No one's any different. Someone And I used to say made a mistake, but they corrected me. They didn't make a mistake, they committed a crime. And when they can say that, and they can honestly look at you and say, I was about to say mistake, but I committed a crime, that weighs a lot, because that to me shows you're taking responsibility for what you did. And that's important, because we all want to point fingers at each other and say, it's your fault, your fault, your fault. But before you point your finger at someone, look at what you did. Put the mirror up to your face. What did you do? What could have you done better to prevent something from happening? That's not always the case, but at least self-reflect. Self-reflect and have dialogue. So, people of Berkeley, where are the Berkeley people? Raise your hands so I know where I can focus most of my conversation. 2 hands, all right, sir. What's going on in Berkeley? What do you guys want to talk about? Oh, I'm sorry, before we do that, Chief, please come up here really quickly. Thank you for having us in your city. Introduce yourself, tell these people about yourself, and why you think it's important to have the Barbershop Forum here, sir.
My name's Andy Greenwood. I'm the Chief of Police in Berkeley. I've been with the department for 32, coming 33 years, but I've been in Berkeley my entire life, basically, a couple of years at SF State, aside from that. And the idea of the Barbershop Forum was Rashawn Cummings, who's a sergeant who works for me, and he's here tonight. Over here, Rashawn brought to my attention that these were happening and asked if I'd be willing to support him, supporting him. And I looked into it and immediately got to yes really quickly, like tell me what I need to do. Thanks to Sean and Byron Wright and our Community Services Bureau, we're glad to be supporting this. For me, the fundamental important thing in police community relations is trust, and that we are acting in a way as police officers that earns and deserves the trust of the community we work in. We can't do our work without trust of the community, and this is an opportunity for me, for us, and we have lots of folks here from the Berkeley Police Department to hear, I hope, honest accounts of people's concerns who live here, what they would like to see in policing. We want to identify positive paths forward, and no finger pointing. I think an environment where it's not us, them, it's us together as a community making it safe. So really just in service to that idea that there be honest dialogue. We're here to listen. I'm here primarily to listen, really, as we think about ways that we can better and better engage with our community, including, I would say, especially a community in Southwest Berkeley where there are a lot of folks who I think historically don't feel like they've had voice, where they have not necessarily come out to meetings where it's police community meetings, and I thought this was a great opportunity to leverage what you're doing to get folks to turn out who don't necessarily turn out. And what I really like tonight is I see a lot of people that I haven't seen before here, and I welcome those folks. I see people that I have seen before, and I see people that I know, through the work that are here because they have a huge interest in this being a safe community for everybody. And I think police are part of the community, and community is part of the police, and that's the most effective. So I'll say that. Thank you.
And then they decided that they needed someone with a big mouth, so they dragged me in, and I decided to come in. So my big mouth is here to moderate the conversation. I'm not going to always agree with people, so that's when I challenge you. I'm not going to always agree with the police officers and the law enforcement side, so I challenge them. I'm not going to always agree with the community, so I challenge them. My job is when I walk out and all of you hate me. Just for a minute, though. Just for a minute. Not for the whole night. Just for a minute. So that's my job, to make sure everything is out there on the table. So now, yes, sir.
I just wanted to say I commend you, Chief Greenwood. He has something in common with me. We both are native Berkeleys, actually. But I also wanted to challenge the barbershop, as well as community, as well as police, that this is just one aspect of bridging the gap between the community. I grew up in South Berkeley, in terms of relationships. I say that because it takes two people, if not more, to basically bridge in terms of building a partnership and trust. So one of the things I challenge the police in particular is that when you do activities, you should come to the community. I represent the NAACP, among other things. And one of the things that is very challenging is the very fact is that if you're going to build any kind of bridge, you have to be able to do the outreach that brings in the community in terms of the planning as well as the outreach in this process. Without that, you're not going to build any trust.
Wait, sir. Wait. You can't just drop something and walk away. That's not how it works, my friend. This is our show. The barbershop here. I know what you do in other places. So you put a challenge out. What part of the challenge do you accept and you receive?
Very good. I've already put up a challenge.
Right, but what part do you take in the
Let me
challenge?
just put it this way. There is history to this. One of the reasons why this has happened, in all honesty, is that in July, we wrote a letter to NAACP as well as Friends of Adelaide, which is where I'm going now as we speak, which is a community organization, grassroots organization that came out of the issue around gentrification and displacement. And one of the things that we brought to the table was essentially doing a forum like this.
Well, let me stop you really quickly because we were contacted before June to come here. So that's number one.
But
Number
I
two,
wanted-
but excuse me, sir. We're going to be respectful. But number two is, please answer my question. What part of the challenge are you accepting that you also gave out?
The challenge is doing something like this. Is that?
No, what are you accepting? You said that you challenged them to do community outreach. You challenged them to show up. They're here. I don't know what they normally do. This is our first time being here. But I'm saying, what is your role? What is your responsibility? What would you take away from this also?
What I like to take away from this is something that's pragmatic, that allows for programs that do outreach to you, as well as being able to look at law enforcement as being one part of the tool in terms of being able to help people in South Berkeley.
Okay. Let me ask you, I guess I'm not getting, maybe I'm not answering my question correctly.
Okay.
So my question is, you gave them a challenge, right?
Correct.
But in that challenge, what are you willing to do to help perform that challenge? To help
I'm already doing it.
What are you doing? You were about to leave.
What I'm doing is basically helping to facilitate a dialogue.
But you were leaving, sir. You asked the question and you was about to leave.
And again, the reason why I'm leaving is because I'm already committed. I came here because I found out at the last minute that this was going on. And for the most part, that is part of what disturbs me, is the very fact is that I learned after the fact that I learned this probably within less than 3 days that this was going on.
Okay.
Now, if that's any reason to think that we're doing outreach and that we're creating partnership with essentially me being able to at least create the kind of bridge to be able to talk about outreach and to be part of that planning process, which is part of the NAACP's particular task. This gentleman right here is the president. This gentleman right here is the vice president.
Got it. Okay, let me keep moving on with this conversation. So my challenge to you is for you to stay until the end.
I can't.
Then what if they say they can't, then you'll be
Especially
upset.
when I already had committed to this meeting.
Well, I appreciate you coming.
So that's the reason
Thank
why
you.
I have to
Thank
say,
you very much.
If I had known.
We appreciate you for coming. Thank you. Someone else had their hand up about what's going on. What are we talking about? You know I'll come to you in a minute. About what's going on in this community. Yes, sir.
Probably young lives battle in Berkeley.
You should be a little bit louder, sir. I'm sorry.
I grew up junior jackets and young lives battle in Berkeley. I've been in Berkeley for 49 years. The gentleman talked about outreach with the officers. When I was growing up, the officers was the coaches in the community and really engaged with the kids. It's been some type of separation. There's no engagement with the kids. It's only when they get in trouble and the kids see that. So I would like the officers, they mentioned hiring new officers, and that's fine. But I would like the new officers or old officers that's here to come down and engage with the kids, be a part of the culture of the kids. We got a football program, youth football program, cheer, 125 kids at San Pablo Park, practice Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from 5 to 7. I invited officers. The mayor came last year. Last year was our first year of the program, and it was successful. The mayor came down. I reached out this year to the police department. I don't know what gentleman, I don't remember his name, but first day of practice, they didn't show up. And see, that's the type of stuff that the kids, they see. And that's what they get at home. They get broken promises. So we got to restore that foundation back here in Berkeley. When I was growing up, we had youth programs like YP, I don't know if people remember that, but we had resources where we had summer jobs, where where we could work and earn our money. You know, where we didn't have all that idle time getting in trouble. But it's not a lot of resources no more for the youth in Berkeley. It's separated, like South Berkeley, the resources at Yap, but the waterfront, the West Berkeley, there's really no resources down there, so they got to come up to South Berkeley, but they're not going to do that. And when I was coming up, it was every YMCA. It was 2 YMCAs in West Berkeley, 3 up here. It was a lot of resources for the kids. So we need to bring that back, and the officers need to start engaging with these kids because it's a separation and there's no trust. All they think officers is here is to put them behind bars. When I was growing up, we had relationships with them.
Got it. Before you sit down, I can't help you with the YMCA's.
Yeah.
No, hold on. The YMCA's and other stuff. Are there any elected officials from Berkeley here?
Former elected official.
Former elected officials. Thank you, former elected officials. But no elected officials. Ma'am, thank you. I don't know who you are right now, so I'm just.
My name is Paola Laverde, and I'm a rent board commissioner for the city of Berkeley.
You're a what, sorry?
Rent board
Rent board
commissioner.
commissioner. So I can't help with that part, but the chief's right here. You give him that formal invitation again, and he can work it out. Ain't that right, Chief? We can work something out. What are those dates again? Your practice?
Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, San Pablo Park from 5 to 7. We practice.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 5 to 7, San Pablo Park.
We play our home games at Berkeley High on Sunday.
All right.
All day. We got 14.
I got you. Thank you. Someone else is raising their hand. I saw someone else's hand. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to let the gentleman know you referenced YEP Youth Employment Program. The city does operate a Youth Works Employment Program. There's information at the table.
Perfect. Stand up. Say that one more time.
The city operates a youth employment program called Youth Works. It's been in existence since around the 70s. We hire the youth, we put them on payroll. They can work in the summer or they can work in the winter. And we also have an extended program for youth that are aged 18 through 25. There's a lot more information at the front table.
Thank you so much. So what else is going on here in Berkeley? I see your hand, sir. You got your arms raised, folded. What's up? What's up? Talk to me.
How you doing?
Good.
My name is Mansour Dean. I'm the president of Berkeley NACP. I live in South Berkeley on Sacramento Street. In 2015, the city of Berkeley passed a resolution called General Order B4, which is for fair and impartial policing, which carry accountability and transparency for officers to report, on stops and various engagement with the community. I would like to see the Berkeley Police Department 100% put that process in place in the city of Berkeley, as well as the data collection and analysis, so we can identify officers that might need counseling.
So how is that right now, that program you're talking about? You said 2015?
2015.
So 3 years ago you passed it?
Yeah.
How's it working?
It's better, in my opinion. Of course, we still have disparities in stops and searches and those kind of things. And we'd like to see equity in that area.
No, it's an ongoing community conversation. There are disparities. There's, I think it's an open question. We keep looking at what is it that we have the power to address in terms of disparities, and what are results of societal disparities and the disparities in outcomes due to race and wealth and everything else, whether it's education system or health system and so forth, and how those come into play. And that's not to avoid responsibility. It's just it is a big problem, a community problem for us.
So it appears that you guys are working on it, and it appears you're saying it's better, so we just keep working together. That's good. I like resolutions that quickly. We're having fun tonight. Anyone else? Before I want to bring in something else. Yes, ma'am.
I have a similar interest or concern along the same line, and I put it this way, that meetings are wonderful, and I enjoy the progress, hearing about the progress and so forth. But there's still a big gap between the community-oriented type meeting and what happens on the street. And that's where there seems to be a gap in terms of when you have that sort of inconsistency in terms of the spirit that's in these kinds of meetings. And it only takes one with the power on the hip and otherwise to connote a whole different kind of spirit. Where at that point in a timely manner before something really happens, where you have a reaction, a community meeting where people are really nervous and scared and so forth. I wonder if there's another step before that when there is that kind of unfortunate confrontation that has a different kind of, doesn't have a family spirit. Where do people go? Where can there be a dialogue? Where can something happen? And maybe it just won't happen, I don't know, but I just want to put it out there that that's something that's bothered me for a long time. When I was on the city council and my colleagues, and we talked about that, and they said, well, Carol, it's just that blue line. Their colleagues know that there is that one bad apple or two bad apples, but, that's just the way it is. They're not gonna, but that's not true, because I have talked to others and I've listened to people who've given lectures and participated all over the country, and there are officers who have taken a stand and received strong kinds of reaction because they took a stand and spoke out against their colleagues. So that's not true. It does happen. But in Berkeley, in South Berkeley, where I have been and served in various official capacities, I see that gap. And so what happens with the kids and even the older ones, you lose a sense of, well, why should I go to a meeting? Because you're going to have that one guy, and he can turn it all around in a minute, and who's going to believe me? So I just want to put that out there.
I got kind of lost, to be
Okay.
honest. Am I the only one? Okay, so let me try. You're saying that you want a conversation, a dialogue after something happens. Does that not happen right now? I'm confused.
Well, I can see I maybe confused you. Because I'm not saying I want it. I just wonder if there can be something, I don't know what that something is, that could happen more immediately after there's some kind of...
So what kind of incident? Give me an example. So an incident like what happens?
Well, a police officer is accused of being brutal or treating a kid in an unnecessary rough way, for example. Thank you. What happens at that point, other than the kid hopefully doesn't get killed or something terrible doesn't happen?
So you want some kind of immediate addressing of it?
Pardon me?
You want someone to address those kind of situations?
I'm wondering if through the community collaborative decision-making process or thinking through problems, if we can come up with a creative way, some kind of reservoir, some kind of something where after something like that happens, and before somebody gets killed, that you can have some way for that kid. I'm really thinking about the youngster. Is there anything that the community can think of that would be helpful in collaboration, decision-making, problem-solving as a family, as a community? Is there any way we can come up with something that's creative? And maybe there's something already going on that I don't know about.
Sir, do you want to address that?
Well, as the chief can tell you, the city of Berkeley the city of Berkeley has a police review commission where people can take their complaints to, and I think that would be the most immediate place for a person to go if they have an issue or complaint regarding the police.
So going to the community
Review commission.
You guys are saying?
I was just going to say, I think she was suggesting that there be a community.
Louder. And I know you can be loud.
It sounded like you were suggesting that there be a community review board where anybody in the community could come and speak and ask questions.
That would be fine. It has to be something that's practical on the level of everyday folks, and that you can come and say, last night, I almost got killed. Officer so-and-so kicked my ass. I'm just making up stuff.
Right.
But it's immediate that you can access as a regular folk living in the neighborhood.
Does that
Yes.
happen with the board you're talking about? So you have it.
The chief can explain.
You already have it in your community?
So we have the Police Review Commission, which is, reviews policy, but also importantly, conducts their investigations, independent of the police department, of allegations of wrongdoing by police officers. And the police department, we have an internal affairs unit, so 2 sergeants who investigate complaints. Any complaint made to the PRC is also investigated by our folks. So there's 2 separate independent investigations that lead to findings and potentially lead to discipline should it warrant it. One of the things I've learned in the 2 years as chief is there's some complexity in that. For example, we'll have, so first off, let me just say, I would invite people to immediately contact the PRC and the police department if an incident happens, like last night something happened and it was alarming or upsetting, call me, 981-5700, you can call. We can try and figure out what it was to give information, and we do have a complaint process if that's where it goes, and that's fine with me. We're about to put on body-worn cameras to our people at the end of October, and that'll be yet another level of accountability in terms of our ability to review what our officers have done, share information with people who are concerned about the way the interaction went down. One of the frustrations I have, really honestly, is that people can make a complaint to the PRC, and then we find, and Sergeant Cummings, if he just could shake his head if he agrees, or call me out if I'm misstating, but then we find that that person won't get interviewed by our people. And so Sergeant Cummings, for example, who's investigating and wants to interview the person, doesn't have an opportunity to, which reduces information for me, for my decision-making process about an incident. So I'm fine with people registering complaints with the PRC and invite them to do it with us as well, because that's a way we can find out if we have a problem, and we'll take action as appropriate.
Is it okay to have a conversation back and forth like this, or no?
I'll give you a few more seconds. Go ahead.
No, I don't want
No, go ahead.
Thank you. So, just help me with this, walk me through this. I'm a 15-year-old girl, and I had an encounter with the local police in South Berkeley, and I think something has happened, I just make up something has happened that disturbs me. What do I, tell me how I access, now I'm playing a role because I have appointed people to be on that review commission, but what would I do? What do I, just start with that, what do I do?
So I think
Let's bring it right down to earth.
Yeah, no, I think straight up, that's a tough place for a 15-year-old to be on their own. So I think, but I think we need to be tighter with our community so that 15-year-old's allies and advocates, their parents, their caretakers, maybe an elder sibling can go with them and say, no, you have voice in this.
Okay.
We can make a complaint. I will go with you and make sure that you are safe in doing that. That's my off the top of my head response is we need to, when I talk about trust, I feel like there needs to be the trust so that person feels they have the ability to have an ally, to have somebody with them, to go through the process.
Yes.
If I may, my name is Russell Bloom, and I'm the independent police auditor for Bay Area Rapid Transit. Because this conversation has come up around civilian oversight of law enforcement, I just wanted to make sure to introduce myself and give a face to my agency. Actually, my start in police oversight was as a Berkeley Police Review Commissioner in 2009. Now, with BART, we have a similar system where anybody who has a complaint about any allegation of misconduct by a BART police officer can contact either my office, and we may conduct an independent investigation, deliver our findings to the Civilian Review Board. Those findings will ultimately go to the chief of the BART Police Department for implementation and any discipline that's appropriate. Obviously, we have a BART station right here. There are 2 others in Berkeley, so I definitely want the community of Berkeley to be aware that we exist. We've recently undergone a transition in our oversight model, which Jack may recall was initiated as a result of Oscar Grant's death by the board of directors at BART. After all these many years, we revisited the original model, found 50 ways to improve it, and those have all been recently implemented. So any person may lodge any allegation of misconduct with my office, and we're authorized to do a full independent investigation of that. Our information's on the BART.gov website. I'll leave a couple of postcards up here that have my contact information, but I'm always glad to answer questions about either my office, the BART Civilian Review Board, or independent police oversight in general, which is growing nationally and internationally, and is a way that individuals can be heard, but also that if policy deficiencies are detected because of an individual complaint or a series of complaints, it's a way of affecting revisions or refinements to existing policies so that hopefully those things don't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for letting me talk.
Of course.
Sir.
So I'm Sergeant Sean Cummings. I'm actually the internal affairs sergeant that Chief Greenwood actually mentioned. And so I wanted to help clear up some things for you all. When a complaint is filed with the Police Review Commission, it automatically comes to my office. I work with the Police Review Commission on a daily basis, through emails, via phone. I was meeting with them at least twice a month. So whenever you file a complaint with them, note it automatically generates a complaint with the police department. I'm responsible for investigating along with my partner, Sergeant Malero. And the biggest thing, there's a misconception that if I file a complaint with the police department, all they're going to do is sweep it under the rug and cover up for their colleagues. That couldn't be further from the truth. And I can tell you, without going too far into my background, I grew up in Richmond, and I've seen it from both sides. Okay, and by the time I was 18, I could run down the number of people that have been killed in my community, that went to jail, people that I'm still friends with to this day, who are returning citizens as well. And I have family members in my family right now that just got out from doing 30 years and 17 years. So I understand both sides. So I want you to know, if you file a complaint with the Police Review Commission or my office, I'm going to do my diligence to investigate it in its entirety. Okay? I'm not going to make any judgments one way or another. My job is to find out what happened. Facts, via whether that be body cameras, cameras from community stores, from people's homes, statements from officers, statements from the community, and statements from just witnesses who just happen to see. I'm going to take all that, put it together, investigate it, and then I'm going to present it before a board. So I don't want you to be fearful to come to my office thinking all they're going to do is cover it up. Because for me, accountability is very important. Because if someone gives our department a black eye, it gives me a black eye. It makes me look bad. It gives you mistrust of me as well as my colleagues. So I want you to know, if you have a complaint, feel free to call me, and we can take care of it. And I can leave you my information at the end of the conversation.
I just want to ask you real quick. No, that's great. Who's on the board? Who's on the board that you're going to submit this information?
Okay, so the board is actually made up of multiple people. Once the city manager has the vice city manager sits on the board. It's also made up of several supervisors from patrol, the union, as well as command staff.
Police?
Yes. Well, not all police. The city manager sends a person from the board as well. But I want you to know, after the board reviews it, they make recommendations. They don't actually make the decision. The ultimate decision is ultimately made by the chief of police.
Thank you for assessment.
You good?
I'm good.
I can answer questions afterwards.
No, I'm just teasing. So, is there another question? Yes, sir.
I wanted to comment on the complaint process.
Yes, of course.
So, my name is Alfred. I've been working with the reason the Southwest Berkeley community for many years now, especially on police complaints and disparity in traffic stops, etc. There was a recent movement to reform the Police Review Commission. Right now, it's not an independent body, but most importantly, many people in the community, and we've got firsthand knowledge. We've been very close with Mansour and the whole office of people saying the complaint process is one-sided, and it doesn't, as Officer Cummings just mentioned, it doesn't do any good to file a complaint. And in effect, the complaint process is broken and needs to be fixed. There's no access to police records. The police can, and during the process, the complainant comes in and gives their story and have to leave the room, and then the police, and while the police are sitting there, and the complainant has to leave the room. So the process is broken, and it needs to be fixed.
So are you saying it discourages people from going forward?
Absolutely.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. So
Now, is that the police, is that the internal affairs thing, or is that the board you guys have is separate?
No, it's the PRC complaint, and I'm not sure about the police complaint process, how it works, but there are no access to internal records about the incidents, and people are frustrated. They don't file complaints.
So who's in charge of your PRC?
Well, we're trying to get it reformed. The city is in charge of it, the city manager,
Okay.
and we're working on that.
Got it.
But I just want to make that comment about complaints.
Does anyone want to say anything back to that, or we're good with that? We're good. All right. Another important thing that we always talk about, because one of the issues that we've always had is that police always want to blame, people want to blame police for every single thing that happens. Police do a lot of things. We understand. We do a lot of things. We understand. But there's a time where you have to start taking that responsibility for yourself. We talked about Jack earlier. Jack talked about his son being on the BART platform. 2 sons, right? Both sons went on the BART platform when Oscar Grant was killed. Everyone got upset after Oscar Grant was killed. Rightfully so, right? But Jack had a loss that recently happened. It was his fiancée, Jack Hooker. His fiancée, who was a member of the Barbershop Forum, didn't always agree with us, but she came out, supported him, supported my sir here and there. There was support, there was a family. She was out there fighting for people in the community. But when she was murdered, there was no outrage. No one fought for her.
How many?
That's great, Jack.
Yeah, what made me also want to organize with the police and have this dialogue, it wasn't just about police brutality to me. How many of you heard of John Two Cotwell? How many of you heard of Chris Rafferty? See, those 2 young men, they were also on the platform with Oscar Grant the night Oscar Grant was murdered. But Chris and John too were also murdered after Oscar Grant was murdered, but they weren't murdered by a police officer. They were murdered on the streets of Hayward, California. But there was no outrage, and what disturbed me is when an activist say, I'm Oscar Grant, I am Oscar Grant, you can't even relate to Oscar Grant. How can you say you're Oscar Grant, but you can't even stand up for his 2 friends that were murdered, that were on the platform with Oscar Grant that night? How many of you heard of Terrence Kelly? Terrence Kelly, that also disturbed me. Terrence Kelly was a star football player at De La Salle, and he was also murdered. He would have been in the NFL from college, he would have been one and done into the NFL. But there was no outrage when Terrence Kelly was murdered. So imagine if Terrence Kelly was murdered by a police officer, what the outrage would have been if Terrence Kelly would have been murdered by a police officer. So that disturbs me. And so then, how many of you heard of Tina Harden? Well, that's who Paul was talking about. That was my fiance. And 2 months ago, she was murdered in Richmond, California. She was brutally stabbed, and after she was stabbed, she was set on fire. And there was no outrage about that. And the cold part about that part, the young man who murdered her turned on the stoves and kept the gas going. And his plan was to blow up the Manors, Kennedy Manors in Richmond, California, where she was murdered. So if everything would have happened, it would have blew the building up, and a lot of people would have been murdered or just set on fire that day. So my thing is, we can go on and on about police brutality, but to me, and this is where the conversation, it gets kind of crazy, well, that's just a distraction. How can you tell a mother who lost her child to murder that it's a distraction, that we should be talking about police brutality and not Terrence Kelly, John C. Caldwell, or Chris Rafferty, or Tina Harden?
My phones are right there.
Give me the phone, Jack. Give me the phone, Jack.
That's a distraction. I think it's important because, like if you add up all the murders around the United States, we lose more young men and women than we do in a war in our communities of the United States. And we don't hear you know, like one thing that got to me is when I also knew I had to change. One time I was watching a 49er game, and a young lady came up to me in the sports bar, and she said, "Hey, I know who you are, Jack. You do a good job organizing, and I appreciate everything you did for Oscar, but who's our voice?" And I was like, "What do you mean, who's your voice?" She said, "The father of my 2 sons was murdered, but the young man who murdered my son is in the community every day, but no one's chasing him out of the community like they chase police officers out." So that kind of like changed my balance. I said, well, so, you know, if I'm not gonna, as a community activist, if I'm not gonna speak for the mothers and fathers and the grandparents and the families that lost loved ones to violence and only speak on police brutality, then I'm doing my community a disservice because I'm not having an honest conversation. Those mothers are grieving just the same way a mother that lost a young man to police brutality or a woman. So that's where the dialogue has to happen. There's more to the dialogue than just police shooting. It's everything that's going on in our communities, and it's everything that's going on in the impacted communities. Like I said earlier, the people who aren't from the communities, who aren't impacted, always want to speak for the impacted communities, and it's time that the impacted community members take over and start being their own voice for these communities.
But it wasn't just that. You had to have a relationship with Richmond PD, right? So how did that work? How did that go into effect?
Now, the most frustrating part is after she was murdered, the frustrating part was not knowing who murdered her. The frustrating part is not being there mentally. I've been off work and just living off my savings because the depression, the mental stuff, everything that you go through. But one thing, because of the barbershop forums, because of the DA relationships, I created being at the table, being able to have a dialogue with the Richmond detectives. They promised me that they would get the person who murdered Harvey. And what they did, they came through with their promise. They got the young man, he's only 17 years old. But one thing they did, they caught the young man who murdered her. So that was kind of, it doesn't take away, but it's kind of like most folks don't even get that in the community. So that was kind of a relief, but the thing is they kept their promise, and because of our relationship, I'm pretty sure they won't say it, but because of the relationship of the barbershop forums and that we established, that they put a lot of effort into making sure that they caught this young man who did that to her. So I do applaud them for doing that, and that's building relationships and being at the table to make sure things happen.
So the Barbershop Forum has been around for 2 years, and it's not about just saying things. We actually do things, because that's very important to do that, not just talk about it, but be about it. Captain Carroll, talk about some of the accomplishments that we've had. Come on. Throughout the 2 years at the Barbershop Forum. Because it's something that's very important, that you want to be a part of the community. The community is so important, and the community is in many different avenues, many different people, many different types of things, because just that relationship right there can lead you to things and lead things from happening. I will say one thing, I won't say any names, but I do know 2 members of our Barbershop Forum were able to come together, law enforcement and community, and they were able to stop a potential issue that happened in Oakland. They were able to stop some kind of possible gang war that could have popped off. They were able to stop and squall the shootings that went off. Maybe I went a little bit too much by saying gang war, but that was a possibility. That could have happened. The 2 sides of the Barbershop Forum met together to take care of that issue.
Okay, some of the highlights, we've had a number of highlights. One of the ones that I'm most proud of is Barbershop Forum has been around for 2 years. We had one forum that was designed to be like a workshop for people who were interested in becoming a police officer or being involved in law enforcement in any capacity. We had 27 people actually apply. Until this day, we have 8 people that actually got hired out of those 27. So people who are like-minded thinkers, believe in this type of concept, are now slowly getting embedded into law enforcement agencies. Another one, recently I was at a meeting where we had a contentious relationship with a community group with the sheriff's office. And walking into that meeting, seeing people who were part of the Barbershop Forum or seeing people who had attended the Barbershop Forum actually brought the tension down drastically. And we were able to come together on an agreement on changing some of the policies that we have within the Sheriff's Office. So the Barbershop Forum is not only helping build in relationships in the community, but now starting to make systemic changes and policy changes within these local law enforcement agencies. So there's a number of benefits. Like I said, the relationships with the formerly incarcerated, that's huge. The ability to just negotiate relationships. For instance, we had there was an issue in East Palo Alto where it was a gang war similar to was that the one you were referring to?
No, something like that.
Okay. There was an issue in East Palo Alto where there was a gang war. Two rival gangs were gonna go actually have a physical confrontation or maybe even a gun battle. They used the Barbershop Forum concept to actually mitigate that. And when we were invited at a later date and time to come witness the work that they've been putting in. And these young people who were gonna shoot it out actually had met for 7 weeks in a row at a barbershop. And the day that we came, they actually had barbecue, fried chicken, and what have you. So that it was like a celebration of the 7th week of the meeting. And they were actually gonna go to Dave and Buster's. So the Barbershop Forum, the concept has been duplicated, it's been emulated. South Carolina just had one similar to what we're doing. So it's starting to become a national model for other communities, other law enforcement agencies to actually duplicate.
So I know everyone here has a cell phone, right? Because I've got to push this plug already. You have a cell phone? Take it out, please. Or your iPad or whatever that is right there.
It is an iPad.
I didn't say nothing like that. I didn't tell Jack. I heard his off like 20 times now. What's that? Oh my goodness, not that kind of stuff, man. I have never.
I got one.
I'm sorry. Add us on Facebook at Barbershop Forum. Instagram is at Barbershop Forum also, because there's an opportunity that we want to come out and help your